Hi, Catherine.
This morning, we are going to be talking a little bit about questions that we get at Hagar, the whys, the whats, um, just those frequently asked questions, and figuring out what you all want to know about what it is that happens in all of the countries where we work and Hagar's work around the world. Um, So we're super excited to be able to talk a little bit more about things that you all care about. Um, and excited to do this moving forward. Any questions that you have, please feel free to ask us and we will address them in our next live. So, Amy, what's one of the questions that we get asked?
One of the biggest questions we get asked is um, why we have chosen to work where we work. And
Mm,
we have chosen to work in the Asia Pacific region. And by extension, the follow-up question to that is, well, do you work in the US?
mm,
And that's such a great question. So let's dive in.
wow.
So yeah, what does that look like, Catherine? Why don't
Yeah.
you just explain a little bit?
Sure. I think that's a phenomenal question. I think it's really important to first say Hagar started in Cambodia right after Cambodia's Khmer Rouge during after the UN occupation, after all of the atrocities there, and so that is sort of where we get our birth from. In Phnom Penh, Cambodia, just post-war, and there the just wide need in the country. And we grew from there. So part of it is just kind of grassroots growth. But when taking that intentional look at why Southeast Asia, why Asia Pacific as the growth, um, that is where the majority of trafficking happens. Um, and it's where there's a real lack of infrastructure. So that flip side of why not the US is there's a lot of infrastructure here in the US. There's a lot of really great organizations doing some phenomenal work. Organizations we work with as implementing partner in Asia Pacific, and we're really lucky to be able to. Organizations that I think we all would say we really respect and admire. But the work that we do is really laser focused on each individual and giving that individual all of the care that they need. And that ends up being a lot of the kind of things that would be considered social work in the US. And we have that here. So that's why we have chosen to work in countries where there is either little or no infrastructure in that way.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. In the latest Global Slavery Index that
Mm,
was just released in 2023, or maybe late 2022, it shows that um, more than 60% of trafficking and modern day slavery, those cases originate in the Asia Pacific region. And
mm,
so that need is really there for sure. And then, of course, as you've mentioned, Catherine, not necessarily having the systems and policies in place to for countries and governments to address those needs. So um, that's maybe a good segue actually into another question that we get all the time is so Hagar works across three programmatic pillars of work.
mm,
We do survivor care, we do prevention efforts, and we do system strengthening efforts as well.
mhm.
And maybe you can explain, Catherine, like what does that actually, how does this model that Hagar uses around the world actually play out?
Mm, mm. Oh, that's a big one, right? So,
Yes, sorry, multiple part. I'm notorious for like squishing three questions into one.
that's fine. Um, yeah, that's great. I think I'll start in reverse order. So the systems strengthening is what would look like in the U.S. sort of policy, working with the governments, and we, with the help of some other people, recently came up with bottom up policy, which means that we look at the individual, and any policies or changes that we're looking at implementing or advocating for have to do with first looking at the individual in our care and what does that person need. So, for instance, in Cambodia, where we've done a lot of judges training for child rights, was because of looking and hearing from survivors saying that they needed more advocacy in the court system. So that system strengthening on a national or local level is by first looking at that individual, which is why we don't really do policy advocacy in other areas of the world or the US, because the people that we work with are in Asia Pacific. And then maybe I will let you, Amy, tell us a little bit about one of the other two.
Well, I find it very interesting. So when Catherine and you and I mean, both worked in Cambodia 10 years ago,
Mhm.
and in the work that we were part of then looked a little bit different. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Hagar at that juncture, in the 2010s, had active facilities, aftercare facilities, a boys' shelter, a girls' shelter, a community learning center, all sorts of different things. And what I find so fascinating about Hagar, this evolution in our practice as an organization has ultimately also been driven by the individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's what does the individual need? And that evolution in care and practice has changed over the years to reflect those needs. So Hagar started many years ago with all sorts of different centers and residential aftercare, et cetera. And that has evolved over the years so that now it's far more of a community-based approach. There are residential care facilities in Afghanistan, and there is one in Cambodia. It's short term. But really that principal focus is that community-based care. It's identifying those needs of that individual and walking that whole journey of restoration with them, not just on our own, but pulling in all sorts of different specializations over time, medical care and counseling and trauma therapy, etc. So what Hagar's work looks like currently is at one point there were a lot of expat staff in our programs all across the world. And now all of Hagar's frontline efforts are led by national teams. It's a fabulous move over the years, and that's something that we've learned has been a great success at Hagar. So our frontline work, that model of care, that survivor care, is led by our national, highly talented leaders locally. And then our prevention efforts as well. These are things that we learned from survivors themselves, survivors raising their voices throughout the process of receiving aftercare from Hagar and saying, first of all, wanting to use their voice to raise awareness when they feel strong and resilient and there's something brewing within them where they never want to let other people experience the same thing that happened to them. But that prevention work as well, which is quite widespread now at Hagar, was ultimately we started doing that because we heard survivors themselves saying this needs to happen. I don't know. Have I missed anything, Catherine? Probably. I feel like there's always a lot. There's always a lot going on.
I think that's the nature of the work we do, right? It's our phenomenal staff that are in the front lines do whatever it is that the person needs. So have we missed something? Probably. Is there something that they did 10 years ago that they don't anymore? Absolutely. And in a couple of years, that might change too. Where, as you said, we're listening to survivors themselves, and really just like walking that everyday journey. And I just think it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is beautiful. Okay, so another question that we get often is because one of our mantras at Hagar is we'll do whatever it takes for as
Mhm.
long as it takes
Yeah.
to restore life and dignity, alongside survivors. And that can just sound like a really long time, like eternity. So how do we explain that one, Catherine? Like sort of balancing that out with really good development practices, which is actually not doing things for people forever and all time. Um, but this essence of Hagar is to do whatever it takes. So
Yeah, I feel like when I think about that, it sort of feels like family,
mm,
where when someone comes into our care, it's like living with or being the parent with that person, um, taking them to doctor's appointments, making sure counseling happens, all the whole gamut of a life, until that person themselves feels ready, along with the team, to move into a space on their own. Um, and then from there, it's sort of that like release. I don't know, my kids are too young yet for me to understand that part, but that release into like doing things on your own. And then once you do release into that, that is still for as long as it takes, because someone might come
mm,
back and say, I need help again. Or you might have an adult that's been within Hagar's care for 20 years say, you know what, my business isn't doing well. And we set them up with a small business loan or a small business grant to get back on their feet again. So that the whatever it takes does feel like forever, but it's not like continued care for 20 years. It might mean that after not hearing from them for 15 years, there's another pop back up, and that will always be there. Sort of that feeling, I think.
that's
What do
a,
you
that's a really good distinction too. It's the for someone who comes to Hagar, knowing that Hagar will always be there.
think? Hmm.
We are a safe place, a haven. We're trustworthy. You know, nothing is too big or too small to be managed. There is knowing that, even though the case might most cases don't last longer than 2 years. With
Hmm.
direct intervention from Hagar, I would say that's probably typical, right? Around 2 years is sort of the
Yeah.
most direct interventions that Hagar would have with a client. But even just knowing that the door is open, this is a safe place. We can handle anything.
Hmm.
Um, ch- Creates that sense of safety for sure. The that provides that safe space for healing to happen.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's about 2 years is right. I know we follow up for at least 2 years after someone's
Yeah.
moved into their own space for living. Um, but yeah, you're right. Once you understand that there's always someone there in your corner, it can be easier to feel the freedom to go off on your own.
Totally. Absolutely.
Mm.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more very quick, common question.
Okay.
It's why would we trust you with our money? Like what makes you trustworthy as an organization? I mean, we are a nonprofit, we're a charitable organization, and so we rely on the generosity and partnership of people just like yourself, hundreds of people. Um, what practices and policies have we put in place, Catherine, that make us really a trustworthy organization if someone wanted to financially partner with us?
Mm. That's a great question. I would say first, do your research, look into us. Look into the third party organizations that we have nothing to do with, like the Better Business Bureau, GuideStar. There's one other one that does the looking at nonprofits. and they're public information, and we'll tell you whether or not we're trustworthy. And I feel like that's the first thing. A second part is we exist to support the work overseas. We exist so that the individuals get the best care possible, the most individualized long-term care that they need. So I think we have lots of different policies in place in the US. We have a lot of policies for lots of different sorts of funds that we get. And if you have any specific questions about where your specific funds will go, we're happy to talk about that. We have people who are very, very purposeful about where they give, and people who sort of just want the funds to go wherever so that we can continue the work. And everybody is so necessary in the work that we do. Yeah, I don't know, Amy. What do you think?
No, I think that that was really insightful. That third party organizations have done all sorts of rigorous assessments, and they're doing that constantly for nonprofits in the U.S. And yeah, do your research for sure.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, we're doing the work on our side too. We're getting independent audits done annually. We're
Yes.
keeping our percentages of costs that we have for administration, fundraising, et cetera. We're keeping them as low as we possibly can, so that the bulk of the funds that we're raising in the U.S. are going to support the work, the direct funding of frontline work. So, yeah, I mean, don't take our word for it. Go and do your research. So, awesome. Well, thanks, Catherine. We will keep doing these every now and then. So, ask us your questions. Pop your comments in the comment section. Send us an email. We really want to hear from you. I
We
want to
do.
make sure that we're communicating the things that matter. So, all
Mm.
right, thanks. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.